I never thought I'd end up here. At my age, you think you've seen it all. You've been through enough to know what people are like, what they want, and what they're capable of. But what I didn't see coming was the betrayal, the lies, and how easily everything I thought I knew about my wife, Linda, crumbled. I'm a man who's always believed in fairness and honesty. Things like loyalty, integrity, and respect are non-negotiable for me. I'm retired now, but I spent my life building a career and raising my family, earning my place in the world. And one thing I've always been certain of is that people, especially the people closest to you, should never lie to your face. And yet, there I was, staring down a truth I never wanted to confront. Everything changed when I found the ticket. It happened a few months ago. A quiet Saturday afternoon, the kind where I was in the middle of sorting through some old books in the garage, getting things organized. Linda was in the kitchen, as usual, doing what she did best, preparing a meal. It was routine, no big deal, or so I thought. I've always been the kind of guy who likes things in order. I believe in knowing what's what, especially in my own house. So when I found that ticket tucked inside a drawer in the kitchen, it caught my attention. I took a look at it, squinting my eyes. It was for a wine tasting event downtown, in a place I'd never even heard of. Linda had never mentioned it, never asked if I'd like to go, and certainly never mentioned who she was going with. "Hey, Linda," I called out as I stood in the doorway of the kitchen, holding the ticket in my hand. "What's this?" She glanced over at me, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Oh, that? It's nothing. Just a work thing. A friend invited me. I told you about it." No fool. I knew damn well she hadn't told me about it. I'd been married to this woman for over 15 years, long enough to know when she was lying. I didn't respond right away. I just stood there, looking at her. She looked back at me a little too calm, too composed. But something in the way she said it didn't sit right with me. I dropped the ticket onto the kitchen counter and walked out without saying another word. But I didn't let it go. I couldn't. For the next few weeks, I kept my eye on her, observing things that had never seemed out of the ordinary before. She started coming home later and later from work, and the excuses grew thinner. "I had to finish up some things," she'd say, or "I ran into someone at the office." But these were things she'd never said before. Linda had always been punctual. She'd always been the one to put dinner on the table, to help me with things around the house. But now, it was like she was vanishing into thin air. I didn't say anything. I kept my mouth shut, biding my time. It wasn't the first time someone had let me down, but this felt different. I could feel the tension building, and I knew it wasn't just work stress or some passing phase. I knew what this was. The cracks in the foundation had started to show, and they weren't going to disappear. Then there were the other little things. At first, they didn't mean much, but the more I paid attention, the more I realized I was seeing patterns. Linda started dressing differently. She had always dressed well, but now, there were new clothes I'd never seen before, clothes that didn't fit with the person I knew her to be. She started wearing more makeup, more jewelry. It was like she was trying to be someone else. And then came the phone. I noticed she started guarding it. At first, it wasn't a big deal. We both had our own phones, but I'd always been the kind of guy who left my phone lying around, no big deal. But not her. She started carrying her phone with her everywhere. If I walked into the room while she was texting, she'd quickly shove the phone into her bag or turn it face down. I caught her a few times texting late at night, whispering to herself about who knows what. But when I asked, she'd brush me off. "Just a work thing," she'd say, with that same fake smile. "Relax." But I wasn't relaxed. Not anymore. The more I watched her, the more I saw. There were texts that didn't add up, phone calls she took in private. She'd leave the room to answer her phone, her face going cold when she saw me looking. The tension between us grew thick, and the lies kept stacking up. Something wasn't right, and I wasn't going to let her treat me like a fool. I don't know what I was expecting, but it sure as hell wasn't what happened next. A few nights ago, after dinner, Linda slipped away into the other room. I was sitting in the living room, flipping through the TV channels when I heard the faint sound of her voice. Not talking to me, not talking to anyone in the house. It was a whisper, a tone I didn't recognize. I turned down the TV. The voice was coming from the back room. My gut tightened. I didn't ask questions. I didn't knock on the door. I just got up and walked to the kitchen. There in the corner of the counter was her phone, sitting there like it was waiting for me. Now, I'm not the type of man who invades privacy, but when your wife starts keeping secrets like this, you don't just sit back and ignore it. I picked up the phone. I unlocked it, and that's when I saw it. Text messages. A few too many. From someone named Dave. The first message I saw was harmless enough, just some casual talk. But as I scrolled down, my blood started to boil. The messages weren't innocent. Can't wait to see you tonight. You looked amazing last time. I think about you all the time. I froze. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. This wasn't some work friend. This wasn't a simple mistake or misunderstanding. This was an affair. I had the proof right in front of me. I threw the phone down on the table, my heart pounding in my chest. I wasn't angry yet, but I could feel it coming. The rage, the betrayal, the disbelief. I stood there trying to steady myself. I wanted to shout, I wanted to smash something, but I didn't. I wasn't going to lose my cool. Not yet. I walked out of the kitchen, trying to calm myself down. I needed to think. I needed a plan. If I confronted her now, it would be too easy for her to lie her way out of it. No, I needed her to slip up one more time. I needed more proof. This wasn't just a mistake. It wasn't just some innocent flirtation. This was her betraying me. And I wasn't about to let it slide. I wasn't going to rush into things. I'd been through enough in my life to know that getting angry and acting on impulse never solved anything. It just made things messy. If there was one thing I knew for sure, it was that Linda wasn't going to get off easy. But I needed to gather more evidence, more pieces to this puzzle. I didn't want her to have an escape. No chance for her to deny what I already knew. The next few days were hell. Linda started to act even more distant. She wasn't even pretending to be interested in what I was doing. She'd come home later, always with an excuse. There was traffic, work ran late, or I had to meet someone for dinner. I didn't buy any of it. The moment she left the house in the morning, I was on high alert, watching for any slip-up. I knew I had to be careful. This wasn't just about getting a confession. It was about ensuring that she wouldn't be able to walk away scot-free. I had a plan now, but it required patience. Patience that I wasn't sure I had left. But I knew one thing. This was war, and Linda wasn't going to win. It wasn't until the following week that I got what I needed. I had been working from home that day, just sitting at my desk, checking emails, doing some light reading. Linda was supposed to be out, supposedly for a work lunch, but I knew better. I wasn't sure where she went or who she met, but I wasn't planning on just sitting idly. I didn't trust her anymore, and I certainly didn't trust her to stay loyal. I took a different approach. I had a friend who worked at a local restaurant, a guy I had known for years. He had seen Linda there before, with a man who didn't fit the picture of her work friend. I had asked him about it casually, and though he was careful not to speak too freely, he did confirm that Linda had been dining there several times over the last month. But it wasn't just the fact that she'd been there with another man that bothered me. It was the way they'd looked at each other. Too familiar. Too close. He didn't say more, but the way he described the situation left nothing to the imagination. That was all the confirmation I needed. Linda wasn't just talking to someone. She was with someone. The next day, I got another clue. A small receipt, tucked in the corner of her purse. I had been looking for a reason to go through it, anything that would give me another piece of the puzzle. The receipt was for a hotel, a place I'd never heard of. A nice, upscale place, far from where we lived. I recognized the name immediately. It was a hotel near the beach, not a place anyone would go for a casual meeting. The first thing I thought was to confront her, to throw it in her face, to demand answers. But I'd learned enough from my years in the service and from life in general. You don't act on impulse. You make sure you've got the full story. So, I played it cool. I kept the receipt in my pocket, acted like everything was normal. I didn't let her know that I had already uncovered more than enough to ruin her. A few days later, I decided to follow her. I had to know the truth. If I had to watch her every step to get it, I would. She was getting ready for one of her meetings. Same story. Late afternoon, a new dress, more makeup. As she walked out the door, I followed her. I didn't care how stupid it looked. I didn't care if she noticed. I wasn't going to let her get away with it. I followed her for miles. She drove out of our neighborhood, down to the highway, and then turned off onto a road I didn't recognize. She finally stopped at the hotel, the one from the receipt. I watched her get out of the car, look around, and walk inside. My heart was pounding in my chest, but I wasn't going to do anything yet. I stayed back, watching from a distance. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. My wife, who I had trusted for so many years, was walking into a hotel with another man. I couldn't see who it was from where I was parked, but it didn't matter. I didn't need to know who it was. I already knew enough. Linda had crossed a line. There was no coming back from this. That night, I didn't say a word to her. I went to bed like I always did. I was calm on the surface, but inside, I was seething. The betrayal cut deep, deeper than I thought possible. The next morning, I didn't wait for her to bring it up. I wasn't going to give her the chance to weave a lie and get away with it. As soon as I saw her, I threw the receipt on the kitchen table. I didn't even look at her. I just stared at the paper, watching her face fall. "Where were you last night?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. Her eyes darted between me and the receipt. She froze, then forced a smile. "What's this about?" "I told you I was meeting some colleagues at a restaurant." I leaned forward, placing my hands flat on the table. "Don't lie to me, Linda. I saw you. I saw you drive to that hotel." She tried to remain calm, but I could see the panic creeping into her eyes. You followed me?" "I've been following the signs," I said, my voice cold. "And I know what you're up to. I know about the texts, the phone calls, the hotel receipts. It's all here, Linda. I'm not stupid. You've been cheating on me." The room was silent for a long moment. The tension between us was thick, suffocating. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. I wasn't done. "I know about Dave. I know about the dinners, the late nights, and I sure as hell know about the hotel. Don't try to deny it." Her face flushed with embarrassment, anger, and guilt all mixed together. She was caught, and there was nowhere left to hide. I didn't mean for it to happen like this." "Don't give me that," I snapped. "How long has this been going on?" She hesitated, looking down. "It's not what you think. It's complicated. I wasn't having any of it." "Complicated? You've been sleeping with another man. That's not complicated. That's betrayal." Linda looked at me, her eyes pleading. "I'm sorry. I was just trying to feel alive again. I didn't want to hurt you." But I didn't care about her excuses. I had no patience for her words anymore. She had broken everything we'd built together for some fleeting thrill. And the worst part was that she thought she could justify it with some flimsy excuse about feeling alive. "You don't get to play the victim here," I said, standing up. "You did this. You ruined everything. And now, you're going to pay for it." I could feel the rage boiling up inside me. I wasn't going to let her weasel her way out of this. No, she was going to face the consequences, whether she liked it or not. I was done playing games. No more pretending that everything was fine. No more letting Linda think she could just talk her way out of this. There was no room for negotiation. She had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed, and I wasn't going to be the fool who took her back with a half-hearted apology and a promise to try harder. I had been a good husband to her, and she knew it. I didn't deserve this, and I wasn't going to let her get away with it. The moment I confronted Linda with the evidence, I could see the shock in her eyes. I had taken her by surprise, and for a few seconds, she couldn't even process it. But as the silence dragged on, she started to crumble. Her shoulders slumped, and her hand went up to her forehead as though trying to keep her thoughts from falling apart. Her mouth opened as if she were about to speak, but the words never came. The silence between us grew unbearable. She knew there was no use in trying to deny it anymore. For the first time, Linda looked scared. I didn't mean for it to go this far," she said, her voice shaky. "It was just a mistake. I'm sorry." I almost laughed. A mistake? How many times do people have to make the same mistake before it's no longer a mistake? How many nights did she lie to me? How many dinners did she pretend to enjoy when she had someone else on her mind? I wasn't interested in her apologies anymore. They were meaningless to me now. "You think a couple of words are going to fix this?" I said, my voice sharp. "You've betrayed me. You've lied to me, cheated on me, and made a fool of me. And now you're sorry? You think that's enough?" Her eyes filled with tears, but I wasn't moved. "Please," she begged. "It didn't mean anything. You're my husband. I love you." I stood there, unmoving. "You're a liar, Linda. You love me? You wouldn't have done this to me if you did." She fell silent again, and for a moment, I could almost feel sorry for her. Almost. But the truth was, she had made her choice. And now, it was my turn to make mine. I wasn't going to sit around and wallow in self-pity. I was going to take control of the situation. I was going to make sure she understood that her actions would have consequences, not just for her, but for everyone in our lives. The plan had already begun to take shape in my mind. I had spent days thinking about it, about how I could make sure that Linda paid for what she'd done. She thought she could just waltz back into my life and continue as if nothing had happened. But no, she was going to see just how serious I was. The first thing I did was to tell her I wanted a divorce. There was no room for second chances. I wasn't the kind of man who could forget something like this. And as much as it hurt, I knew I couldn't live the rest of my life with a woman who had no respect for me. I needed to make it clear that she couldn't just walk away from this unscathed. "You're right about one thing," I said, my voice cold. "This marriage is over. I'm done." She looked at me, wide-eyed, as though she couldn't believe what she was hearing. "You don't mean that," she said, shaking her head. "You can't mean that." "Oh, I mean it," I said. "You're the one who's been living in some fantasy world, and now you're going to face the reality of your actions. I'm not going to let you use me as your backup plan. You don't get to come back from this." She reached out to grab my arm, but I pulled away. "Please don't do this," she whispered. "We've been through so much together. I need you." The coldness in my chest grew. "What you need is to understand that your actions have consequences. You've broken our vows, and now you're going to see how this is going to play out. I'm not just going to forgive and forget. I won't be the fool." I could see the fear in her eyes now, but there was no turning back. The decision had been made. The marriage was over. But Linda wasn't going to let me walk away without a fight. She pleaded. She cried. She begged. She promised to change. She promised that things would be different, that she would never see that man again. She even suggested we go to therapy, like that would magically erase the hurt and the lies. But I wasn't buying it. I had lived through enough betrayal to know when a person was just trying to save face. Linda wasn't sorry because she realized she had hurt me. She was sorry because she got caught. And that was the difference. There was no reconciliation, no coming back from this. She'd made her choice, and now I was going to make mine. After I told her the marriage was over, I made sure to hit her where it hurt most. I knew she had been using me as her safety net for too long, leaning on me for stability while she played around with someone else. But I wasn't just going to walk away quietly. I had a reputation to protect, and I wasn't going to let her taint it. I wasn't going to let her walk into some new life while I was left holding the pieces of our shattered past. I went to work. I didn't just want a divorce. I wanted her to lose everything. I wanted to make sure she couldn't simply move on and pretend like nothing happened. First, I spoke to some mutual friends, making sure they knew the truth. I didn't want her turning up at social events like everything was fine. I didn't want her getting sympathy when she had been the one to destroy our life. I didn't spread rumors, but I made sure the truth was known. I made sure everyone who mattered knew exactly what she had done. Then, I turned to our finances. Linda had always relied on me to handle everything. I took a hard look at our joint assets and started making moves to separate everything. I made sure our accounts were divided up, and I made sure she would have a harder time accessing the wealth she'd grown accustomed to. I also made sure her reputation was hit where it would hurt. Her career. She had worked hard to climb the ladder, but I knew that some well-placed phone calls would bring that all down. I didn't take pleasure in it, but I wasn't going to let her get away with what she'd done. She needed to feel the weight of her actions. It wasn't just about revenge, though. It was about teaching Linda the cost of betrayal. She had stolen from me, not just in terms of trust, but in everything we had built together. I had loved her. I had protected her. And she repaid me by sleeping with another man, lying to my face, and treating me like a fool. I didn't want to tear her life apart for the sake of cruelty. But I did want to make sure she understood that there were consequences to this. There was a cost to destroying a family, and it wasn't going to be paid by me alone. Linda's reaction to the divorce and everything that followed was far from what I expected. I had anticipated her being furious, or at least attempting to make some grand gesture of guilt. But what I hadn't prepared for was the depth of manipulation she was about to pull off. And that in itself would be the last straw. I didn't know it at the time, but she had already started working behind the scenes. She was using everyone we both knew to try and create a narrative where she was the victim, where I was the unreasonable husband. She reached out to friends we had shared, playing the part of the misunderstood woman who had been driven to an affair. She even went as far as to reach out to our family members, trying to spin a story where I was emotionally distant, uncommunicative, and completely to blame for everything that had gone wrong in our marriage. At first, I wasn't worried. I knew what I'd seen. I had proof of her affair. The hotel receipts, the phone records, the dinner dates, the way she had changed. There was no denying what had happened. But as Linda played the victim, I noticed a change in how our circle began to look at me. Friends who had once backed me began to pull away. Family members who I had trusted, who I thought understood the reality of the situation, began to distance themselves from me, too. It wasn't until I received an unexpected phone call from an old colleague, Tom, someone I had worked with years ago, that I began to realize just how deep Linda's web of manipulation had gone. "Hey, John," Tom said, his voice a little uncertain. I just wanted to check in. I've been hearing some things, about Linda, and, well, I'm not sure how to say this, but she's been talking to a lot of people about you. She's been saying some pretty heavy stuff, man. Stuff about you being distant and, kind of unhinged." I felt my chest tighten. "What kind of stuff?" I asked, already dreading the answer. Tom hesitated, and I could tell he was uncomfortable. "She told me you had been controlling, that you weren't a good listener, that she had been trying to make things work for years, and you just weren't there, man. She said you treated her like an afterthought." I swallowed hard, fighting the urge to slam the phone down. "She's lying. You know that, Tom? You know her. That's not who I am." "I know, John," he said quietly. But, she's really convincing. She's been working overtime, talking to everyone. And honestly, I just wanted you to hear it from me first, in case you're hearing the same stuff from other people." The line went silent for a moment, and I felt a sick feeling in my stomach. Linda had always been charming, always had a way of winning people over, even when she was in the wrong. I had never seen her as manipulative, but now, in the wake of everything, it was clear she had been playing everyone against me. And that was where I had made my mistake. I had underestimated her. I hung up the phone and sat there numb. This wasn't just a betrayal of trust. It was a campaign against my reputation. Linda had taken the worst possible thing she could do to me and turned it around, twisting the narrative so she could walk away looking like the innocent party. This wasn't just a marriage falling apart. This was her trying to destroy me, and I wasn't going to stand for it. Over the next few days, I started gathering information, texts, emails, and social media exchanges, anything I could use to defend myself. But it wasn't just about protecting my name anymore. It was about proving that Linda's entire story was a fabrication, a performance she'd staged to manipulate everyone around her. One night, as I was going through some of our old emails and trying to organize my thoughts, I stumbled upon something unexpected. It was an email from her to a friend I hadn't spoken to in a while, a friend who had once been a close confidant to both of us. The email was recent, sent just after the affair had come to light, and it caught my eye. The subject line was simply, "Please don't tell John." I clicked it open, my hands trembling slightly. It was an admission, a confession of sorts, but it was also a chilling reflection of how far Linda had gone to control the narrative. In the email, she was telling her friend about how she had messed up by cheating on me, but there was something deeper, something more revealing beneath her words. She wasn't apologizing. No, she was justifying herself, blaming everything that had gone wrong in our marriage on me. She admitted to the affair, but framed it as an inevitable consequence of me being emotionally unavailable and distant for years. She said she felt trapped and that the affair was a cry for help. But the real kicker, the thing that made my blood run cold, was the final line. She wrote, "I just want to make sure I get the story straight, so when the time comes, John won't be able to spin it. I've been working on our friends and family, just in case he tries to turn it into something it's not. They'll all know it was his fault. I need to make sure I'm not the one who gets left with all the blame." Reading those words, I felt a surge of anger, but also a strange sense of clarity. Linda wasn't just trying to save face. She was plotting her own escape, calculating her every move. She wanted everyone to believe she was the victim, and she had been preparing for this moment long before I ever knew about the affair. I wasn't going to let that happen. I couldn't. I started making plans, the kind of plans that would expose her once and for all. If she wanted to play a game of manipulation and lies, then I was going to show her what real consequences looked like. The first thing I did was reach out to a lawyer. It was time to get the legal ball rolling. But I didn't just want the divorce. I wanted her to be legally accountable for the damage she'd done. I wasn't about to let her walk away from this unscathed. I knew she had been playing the victim, but it was time for her to see how far she had pushed me. I was going to make sure she paid for this, in every sense of the word. As I prepared the documents, I made sure to include the proof I had gathered. The receipts, the emails, the texts, the social media conversations, all of it. Everything that painted Linda as the liar she was. I wasn't just going to leave it to the courts. I was going to make sure that our friends, our family, and anyone who had taken her side knew the truth. Linda would not be allowed to walk away from this unchallenged. I also started thinking about how I could use her own manipulative tactics against her. If she was going to try and control the narrative, I was going to turn the tables. I set up meetings with a few key people she had reached out to, friends, family members, and acquaintances, and I began showing them the evidence of her betrayal. I didn't spread rumors, but I didn't keep quiet either. I wasn't going to let her hide behind her lies any longer. Linda's response to all this was predictable. She came to me, pleading for a second chance. But it was different this time. She wasn't just apologizing. No, now she was trying to manipulate me even further. She said she was done with the affair, that she had cut him off, and that we could start fresh, like it was all a bad dream. She even suggested we take a vacation together, to try and repair what was broken. But I saw through it. Every word, every gesture, every tear was part of her plan. She wasn't sorry. She was just trying to salvage her own image. I turned her down cold. "You've made your choice, Linda," I said. "And now, you'll have to live with the consequences." I knew the time for being patient and diplomatic had passed. Linda had crossed a line, and I wasn't going to let her lie her way out of this. No, she had to face the reality of what she'd done, and I wasn't about to let her walk away unscathed. She had already poisoned our circle of friends and family, turning them against me, and I couldn't stand by while she played the victim in front of everyone. It was time to act, and I was done with her games. This was going to be my move. The first thing I did was make sure the divorce papers were ironclad. I'd been to my lawyer's office, and I made it clear that I wasn't leaving any stone unturned. I had the evidence of Linda's betrayal. Phone records, hotel receipts, social media messages, and I wasn't about to let her rewrite history. I wanted the divorce to be as public as possible, and I made sure that my lawyer understood exactly what I wanted, no hiding behind legal technicalities. This wasn't just about ending a marriage. It was about making Linda's actions known to everyone who mattered. The lawyer explained that in most cases, infidelity didn't affect the division of assets, but I was having none of it. I insisted that Linda's betrayal had cost me far more than just my trust. It had cost me my reputation. It had cost me peace of mind, the respect of my family and friends, and it was going to cost her too. I wanted her to pay, and I was going to make sure that when the dust settled, she would have to answer for everything. When I received the final draft of the papers, I didn't waste any time. I sent them to Linda's lawyer with instructions for a swift and public filing. She wasn't going to have time to stage another apology or try to manipulate me into taking her back. The deal was done. I knew she'd fight back, but I was ready for it. Linda had always been good with money. She had the knack for saving and investing, but she also had a tendency to spend beyond her means. She'd always justified her shopping habits by telling me that I was too tight with money, too focused on saving for the future. I didn't mind that. I believed in financial stability, even if it meant making sacrifices now for later. But now, the tables had turned. The divorce wasn't just about taking back my dignity. It was about ensuring that she didn't come out of this with everything. I had been careful with our finances over the years, putting aside money for retirement, keeping track of all our accounts. Linda, on the other hand, had always been more careless. She'd spend on impulse, rack up credit card bills, and I had always kept a close eye on our joint assets. Now, I used every legal avenue to protect myself. I drained accounts that were solely under my name, set up new savings accounts, and I froze joint assets. There was no way in hell I was going to let Linda walk away with everything. I knew she'd be entitled to a share of our assets, but I wasn't going to let her use her affair as an excuse to demand more than she deserved. I also made sure to consult a financial advisor and get a clear picture of Linda's habits. I found out she'd made some risky investments under her name, things that could easily go sour. I wasn't going to let her turn that into an advantage. I made sure that any shared investments, particularly those with high risks, would be tied to her alone once the divorce was finalized. But the real blow came when I got my hands on her hidden credit card statements, the ones she'd been using for those secret trips and dinners with him. I had all the evidence I needed to show her financial irresponsibility, and I planned to make it public. I wasn't just going to expose her affair. I was going to expose her lies, her manipulation, and her irresponsibility. She wasn't going to get away with using me as a safety net anymore. I was done letting Linda tell her lies and play her victim role. It was time for everyone to know the truth, not just a carefully crafted version of it. I wanted to take away her audience, the friends and family she'd been twisting against me, and give them a first-hand look at who she really was. I started with our closest circle, mutual friends, people who knew us well. It wasn't just about proving my innocence. It was about showing them that Linda was a master manipulator. She'd been telling them that I was controlling and emotionally distant, that she was the one who had been unappreciated for years. I had to make them see the real Linda, the one who cheated on me, lied, and tried to turn my world upside down. I called a meeting with a few close friends, people who I knew could handle the truth. I didn't want a spectacle, but I knew if I kept everything under wraps, Linda would keep playing her hand. I laid everything out, the affair, the manipulation, the lies. I showed them the proof, the texts, the receipts, the email, and the financial trail that connected her to her lover. I made it clear that this wasn't just a betrayal. It was a calculated move to tear my life apart. At first, there was silence. No one really knew how to react. But slowly, the truth began to sink in. I saw the look of shock on their faces, the disbelief, and then the understanding. They weren't angry at me. They were angry at her. She had lied to them, too. She'd painted me as the villain, and I wasn't about to let that slide. The word spread. Our circle of friends began to question what they had been told. The ones who had been closest to Linda started to see the cracks in her story. She had no idea that I had made sure to show them everything. When the reality of her betrayal hit them, it hit hard. Linda was a teacher at a local school, and I knew she had a reputation to protect. But just like everything else in her life, it was built on a false narrative. The idea of a sweet, dedicated, hardworking teacher was the perfect cover for her actions, and she had used it to her advantage for years. I wasn't about to let her continue to deceive people about who she really was. I started with her colleagues, those who didn't know the full story, who thought Linda was the model teacher. I made sure they knew the truth. I didn't want to get her fired, but I wanted to make it clear that the woman they were supporting was not who they thought she was. It wasn't just the affair. I uncovered other details about her life. Her reckless spending habits, the way she used her position to get favors, the way she manipulated students and parents with charm and flattery. I didn't want to tear down her career, but I knew that once her infidelity became public, her position would be compromised. The result was exactly what I wanted. When Linda tried to go back to work after our separation, she faced questions she hadn't been prepared for. Colleagues who had once adored her started asking about her personal life. Parents who had trusted her began pulling their children from her classes. She was forced into a position where she had no choice but to retreat, to protect her job, and to salvage what little respect she had left. Linda hadn't expected me to go public with everything. She thought I'd just disappear, that I'd take the high road and leave her to save face. But I wasn't done. I wasn't going to let her walk away from this looking like the victim. I scheduled a family meeting, something informal, but something that would shake the foundation of Linda's story. I called everyone who mattered, our kids, our parents, and a few friends who I knew could handle the truth. It was time for Linda to face the consequences of her actions. When she walked into the room, she thought it was just going to be another heart-to-heart, another round of her trying to get sympathy and pleading for a second chance. But I wasn't having it. I stood up and laid it out for everyone to hear. I didn't yell. I didn't raise my voice. I simply told them what had happened, the affair, the lies, the manipulation, and I let the evidence speak for itself. At first, Linda tried to interrupt. She tried to defend herself, to explain her side, but the words stuck in her throat. The truth was out. There was nowhere for her to hide. Her face turned pale, and I could see the walls she had carefully built around her life crumbling. In the end, she didn't say much. There were no more tears, no more pleading. All that was left was the realization that she had lost her family, lost her friends, and lost any chance of controlling the narrative. And as I watched her walk away from that room, I knew that she had finally realized the cost of her betrayal.